The cool evening air carried a calm stillness over the Oak Ridge gated community, a neighborhood built for the wealthy, the powerful, and the privileged. The streets were clean, the houses grand, and the silence nearly absolute, except for the quiet footstep of Malik Carter. Dressed in a fitted hoodie and jeans, he walked with his hands in his pockets, heading home after visiting his cousin. The walk wasn't long, just a few blocks. But in places like this, a black man walking alone at night was always enough to raise eyebrows. Malik knew how these places worked. He had grown up understanding the unspoken rules. Walk straight, keep your head down, don't give them a reason. But tonight, those rules wouldn't matter. A low hum cut through the air. An engine, slow and deliberate. A black SUV rolled up behind him, its headlights dimmed. Malik turned slightly, his heart rate kicking up a notch. The SUV suddenly flashed red and blue lights, not the usual police colors, but an off-tone mix that immediately felt wrong. The vehicle stopped just a few feet ahead, and the doors swung open. 3 men stepped out. They wore black tactical vests with HOA security patches, but something was off. Their uniforms weren't standard, their badges looked cheap, and their belts held no proper police gear, only batons, zip ties, and tasers. Malik felt his gut tighten. One of the men, a tall, broad-shouldered officer with sharp features, stepped forward. His badge read, Lieutenant Spencer, but Malik doubted that was his real name. Spencer's cold blue eyes locked onto him. "You got ID?" he demanded. Malik's jaw tightened. "Why?" Spencer took a step closer. "This is private property. You don't belong here." Malik stood firm. "I live here." Spencer smirked. "That's so? Because we got reports of a suspicious individual walking around. You fit the description." Malik knew this game. He had seen it before. They weren't real cops, but they weren't just security either. This was something else. Malik took a breath, steadying himself. "You don't have the right to stop me." The second officer, a wiry man with a scar on his cheek, stepped closer, hand twitching near his baton. "Show your ID. Now." Malik's pulse pounded. He could run, he could argue, or he could stand his ground. He chose the last option. "Not happening," Malik said, voice firm. "You have no legal authority to detain me." Spencer's smirk faded. "Wrong answer." The officers moved fast. 2 of them grabbed Malik's arms, shoving him backward toward the SUV. "Hey, let me go!" Malik struggled, but their grip was iron tight. Scarface yanked out a pair of zip ties, already pulling Malik's wrists together. Malik's breath came faster. This was not a warning or a simple intimidation stunt. This was an arrest, a real one. Or worse. He fought harder, twisting, kicking, but it didn't matter. The grip tightened. They were too strong. Then a deep, commanding voice cut through the night. "Let him go. Now." The officers froze. Malik felt it too, a shift in the air, a sudden, heavy presence. The grip on his arms loosened just slightly as all 3 men turned. Standing just a few feet away, arms crossed, eyes burning with quiet fury, was Idris Elba. He wasn't dressed for battle, a dark coat over a simple shirt and boots. But he didn't need armor. He didn't need weapons. He only needed that look, the one that said he had already calculated every move, every outcome, every way this could end. And if they chose wrong, it wouldn't end well for them. Spencer squinted, recognizing him almost immediately. "You should walk away, Mr. Elba." Idris didn't move, didn't blink. Instead, he took a step forward, slow, deliberate, controlled. Malik, still in their grip, felt a shift in power. The hunters were now being watched. "Last warning," Idris said, voice like steel. "Let him go." Scarface hesitated. His fingers twitched on the zip ties. Spencer, however, gritted his teeth. "This ain't your business." Idris cocked his head slightly. "You're right, it ain't." His eyes flickered to Malik. "But he's mine." For a moment, nobody moved. Tension coiled in the air, thick and electric. Then, finally, Spencer gave a sharp nod. The two men gripping Malik let go instantly, shoving him forward. Malik caught himself, rubbing his wrists, his breath still unsteady. The fake cops took a step back but didn't leave. Spencer's jaw tightened. You don't know what you just stepped into. Idris simply held his stare. Unshaken, unbothered, unmoved. Neither do you. Silence. Then without another word, Spencer motioned for his men to fall back. The fake police climbed back into the SUV, the engine roaring to life. Malik and Idris stood still as the vehicle peeled away down the street, its tail lights fading into the distance. Finally, Malik exhaled, still processing. What the hell was that? Idris kept his eyes on the road ahead, his expression unreadable. That, he muttered, was just the beginning. The SUV's taillights faded into the darkness, but the tension still clung to the air. Malik exhaled sharply, rubbing his wrists where the fake cops had grabbed him. His heartbeat was still racing, his adrenaline refusing to settle. Idris Elba stood beside him, arms crossed, watching the road where the men had disappeared. His sharp eyes weren't just seeing the empty street. He was analyzing, calculating. Something wasn't right. Idris had been in the area visiting an old friend, a retired cop named Raymond Nash. They had been catching up over a drink when Idris had noticed the SUV tailing someone through the gated community. At first, he had ignored it. Just another security patrol. But then he saw the stop, saw the way the men moved. And when Malik refused to comply, Idris had caught the shift in their posture. Tightened grips, controlled aggression. They weren't trying to scare him. They were trying to take him. That's when Idris had stepped in. Now, as he stood next to Malik, he replayed everything in his mind. The uniforms. The badges weren't police-issued. The HOA patch was stitched on, not standard issue. The uniforms were mismatched, different shades of navy and black, as if they had been thrown together. The men. No name tags, no identification. They had gear, but no radios. No real law enforcement carries out patrols without constant communication. The tactics. They were aggressive but controlled. Too rehearsed for neighborhood security, too unprofessional for actual cops. This wasn't just HOA enforcement. This was something else. Malik sighed and shook his head. Man, I knew something was off about them. Idris turned to him. You live here? Malik nodded. Couple of blocks down. My cousin Andre stays in the next street. I was just walking home. Idris studied him. Malik was calm, but his fists were still clenched, anger and fear battling inside him. They said you were trespassing, Idris said. That's not how HOAs work. Malik scoffed. Man, this HOA, they do whatever they want. You think those guys were real cops? Idris shook his head. No chance. Before Malik could respond, the sound of approaching footsteps made them turn. An older black man in a robe stood on the porch of a nearby house, concern etched across his face. Mr. Langston, one of the longtime residents. You boys okay? He asked, his voice low but urgent. Malik nodded. Yeah, for now. Langston sighed and shook his head. This ain't the first time, son, but you best believe it's gonna get worse. Idris narrowed his eyes. Worse? Langston's lips pressed into a thin line. Those weren't cops. That's the HOA's private security team. Been harassing folks they don't want here. Black folks, Malik frowned. But that's illegal, right? Langston gave him a tired look. Doesn't stop him? Idris absorbed this. A corrupt HOA using fake cops to control the community? It was bad enough on its own. But his gut told him this was bigger than just neighborhood discrimination. And he was right. A low rumble cut through the night. The SUV was back. It stopped a few houses down, engine running, headlights dimmed. Idris turned, his muscles coiling. The tinted window rolled down. Spencer, the fake cop with the cold blue eyes, watched them. He didn't step out. Didn't need to. His message was clear. This isn't over. Then after a few seconds, the SUV peeled off again, vanishing into the darkness. Idris exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening. They weren't just trying to scare Malik. They were warning Idris too. Malik swallowed hard. Man, this isn't normal. Idris didn't look at him. His eyes were still on the road. His instincts had never failed him before. And right now, they were telling him one thing. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Idris sat in a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town, stirring a cup of black coffee. His mind was already working, the pieces of last night's encounter fitting into something bigger, something uglier. Across from him sat Raymond Nash, the retired cop and an old friend Idris had been visiting, a man who had seen the worst of corruption and knew where to look for the skeletons. Raymond leaned forward, voice low. You were right, Idris. That wasn't just some rogue HOA security team. There's something deeper here. Idris raised an eyebrow. What do you have for me? Raymond slid a folder across the table. Idris opened it. Inside were reports of missing persons, all black men and women who had either lived in or visited that gated community. The same pattern. Pulled over by security. Accused of trespassing. And then gone. No follow-ups, no real investigations. Just vanished. Idris clenched his jaw. And the HOA president, Richard Kane? Raymond exhaled. That's where it gets worse. Kane isn't just some pencil pusher running a neighborhood association. He's got deep pockets, deep connections. Used to be in real estate, but a lot of his business dealings? Shady as hell. His company, Kane Development, buys up property dirt cheap, usually after the owners get pressured to sell. Sound familiar? Idris nodded slowly. They harass black homeowners until they leave. Then Kane snatches up their houses for next to nothing. Raymond tapped the table. Exactly. And when people fight back, they disappear. Idris sat back thinking. This was bigger than HOA power trips. This was a systematic operation. And now they had their eyes on Malik. Malik sat on his couch staring at his phone. The message was short, a simple, chilling warning. You don't belong here. Leave before it's too late. No name, no number, just a threat. Malik's stomach tightened. He had done nothing wrong. But he knew how this worked. He had heard stories, neighbors whispering about people who left in the dead of night, too afraid to fight back. He had ignored it before. But after last night, he knew better. His hands clenched into fists. He wasn't going anywhere. A knock at the door made him jump. He hesitated, then grabbed a baseball bat before opening it, just in case. It was Idris. One look at Malik's face and Idris knew. They've contacted you, haven't they? Malik swallowed hard and showed him the message. Idris studied it, his expression unreadable. Then he looked up. Pack a bag. Malik frowned. What? Why? Idris's voice was calm but firm. Because they're coming again, and this time I'll be waiting. The night air was thick with tension. Idris sat in the shadows across the street from Malik's house, watching, waiting. He knew they would come. They always did. Malik was inside, pacing, the weight of everything, the threats, the history of missing black residents, the power behind it all, had settled on his chest like a boulder. But he refused to run. Then the headlights appeared. A black SUV rolled up in silence, stopping just outside Malik's driveway. No sirens, no warning, just a slow, predatory approach. Idris tightened his grip on the baton he had taken from the fake cop last night. Game time. The men moved fast, too fast for simple security guards. 4 of them, black tactical gear, no badges, no real uniforms. 1 went to the back door, 2 rushed the front, and the last man stayed by the SUV, keeping watch. Malik barely had time to react before his door was kicked open. Get down, one of them barked, rushing in. Malik resisted. I live here, he shouted, but they didn't care. They grabbed him, yanking him forward. His feet barely touched the ground as they dragged him outside. That's when the lights cut out. The entire street was plunged into darkness. For a split second, the fake cops hesitated. Then, Idris struck. The first man never saw him coming. Crack! Idris's baton connected with the back of his knee, sending him collapsing with a grunt. The second man turned, reaching for his weapon. Too slow. Idris slammed an elbow into his throat and twisted the baton against his arm with expert precision. A sickening pop. 2 down. Malik broke free in the chaos, scrambling backwards. The third man lunged at Idris. Big, strong, but sloppy. Idris ducked, sidestepped, and sent a devastating knee into the guy's ribs. The impact echoed. The man gasped, stumbled, and Idris finished him with a brutal strike to the temple. 3 down. The fourth man, the driver, the leader, was backing away, hands up, fear in his eyes. I don't want any trouble, man, he stammered. Idris stalked toward him. You broke into a man's home. That's trouble. The man held up his hands. Wait, I'll talk. Idris stopped. Then start talking. The man gulped, looking around. We don't work for the HOA. Not really. We work for someone higher up. Idris's eyes narrowed. Who? The man hesitated, then muttered a name. Richard Kane, the HOA president. The man shook his head. No, someone bigger. Kane is just the front. Malik and Idris exchanged glances. Idris took a step closer, voice low and deadly. Then who's really running this? The man swallowed hard. A group of elites, real estate tycoons. They use people like us to scare black folks out. Then they buy the property cheap. It's bigger than just this neighborhood. It's a whole system. The truth hit like a sledgehammer. This wasn't just about Malik. This wasn't even just about this gated community. This was an entire corrupt network, an organized operation to drive black residents out of valuable neighborhoods. And Idris had just put himself right in the middle of it. 1 a.m. The HOA office stood dark and silent, a fortress hiding something sinister. Idris moved like a shadow, slipping past security cameras, using blind spots he had memorized from hours of surveillance. Inside, the building was too quiet, too calculated. He found the hidden surveillance room behind a bookshelf, exactly where the informant had hinted. And that's where he saw it. A wall of monitors flickered in the dim light, displaying real-time feeds from hidden cameras. Inside homes, on front porches, even bedrooms. Idris clenched his jaw. They were watching every black family in the neighborhood. One screen played an archived recording. Richard Kane, the HOA president, leaning back in his leather chair, whiskey in hand, laughing. They don't belong here. None of them. We push them out, buy the property dirt cheap, flip it for triple. This isn't a neighborhood. It's an investment. Another clip. A man resisting eviction. His wife crying, Kane smirking. They'll leave, one way or another. Idris's fingers curled into fists. He pressed record on his phone, capturing everything. Just as he turned to leave, the door slammed shut. A deep metallic clank echoed. Locked. The security feed flickered. They knew he was here. A distorted voice crackled over the intercom. Did you really think you'd walk out of here? Outside, headlights flashed. SUVs, armed men pouring out. This wasn't just an HOA. This was a private militia. Idris exhaled. No time to think. Just time to act. The first guard burst in. Idris grabbed a metal chair, swung it hard. The impact sent the man crashing into a desk. More came, guns raised. Idris moved first. Boom! He slammed a fire extinguisher into another's chest. A gunshot rang out. Missed. He spun, grabbing the man's arm, twisting it until, crack, the gun dropped. Idris caught it midair. 3 shots, 3 men down. The hallway was flooded with boots, more incoming. Idris grabbed a chair and smashed the overhead lights. Darkness. His domain. They hesitated. Bad mistake. He moved like a ghost, weaving through the chaos. Silent. Precise. Deadly. A knife flashed. Idris caught the wrist, twisted, bones snapped. He turned the blade and 1 down. Another came, swinging a baton. Idris ducked, countered with an elbow to the jaw. 2 down. The last one pulled a gun. Too slow. Idris closed the distance. A brutal strike to the throat, a knee to the gut, a final crushing punch. 3 down. The last door creaked open. Inside, Richard Kane sat behind his desk, calm, smug, unbothered. He swirled his whiskey glass, barely looking up. "You think you won?" he mused. "You're a footnote in a system bigger than you can imagine." Idris stepped closer. Kane smirked. "I own this city." Idris pulled out his phone, the recording still playing. Kane's smirk vanished. Idris's voice was cold, final. "Not anymore." Richard Kane's office was in chaos. Papers scattered, furniture overturned, blood smeared across the floor from the brutal fight outside. And yet he was still trying to escape. Kane lunged toward a hidden panic button under his desk. Idris moved first. Slam! He grabbed Kane by the collar and yanked him back, slamming him into a bookshelf. Kane gasped, eyes wild with panic. "You can't do this! You don't know who I am!" Idris's expression didn't change. He knew exactly who he was. A coward, a man who built his power on fear. Kane suddenly pulled a gun from his ankle holster. Too slow. Idris knocked the gun away. The weapon clattered across the floor. Kane threw a desperate punch. Idris barely flinched. One counterstrike, a brutal elbow to the jaw. Kane stumbled, dazed, blood dripping from his mouth. Another punch, another! The fear in Kane's eyes turned to pure terror. He collapsed against the desk, breathing hard, shaking. "Please, I'll pay you, whatever you want." Idris's jaw tightened. It was always about money for these people. But not tonight. Idris pulled out his phone and turned on the live stream. Every HOA member, every corrupt official, and every wealthy elite involved in this scheme, they were about to watch Kane expose himself. He shoved the phone in Kane's face. "Talk." Kane hesitated. Idris grabbed the gun off the floor and placed it in Kane's hand, forcing him to point it at his own head. "Talk." Kane's breath came in short gasps. He looked at the screen. He knew there was no way out. And then, I did it. His voice shook. "I paid them. The fake cops, the threats, the evictions. It was all me. I wanted the property value to rise. The more they feared us, the more they sold for cheap. It was always about the money." Idris kept the camera on him. Millions were watching now. The police sirens blared outside. Someone had called them. Idris had what he needed. He grabbed Kane's tie, yanked him forward, and hissed, "Justice is coming, and this time no one's protecting you." The door burst open. Cops stormed in, guns raised, but not at Idris. At Kane. He was done. But Idris knew the truth. Men like him always found a way out. Not this time. Idris walked outside past the flashing police lights. A woman was waiting. Investigative journalist Malik Carter. He handed her a USB drive. "It's all here. Every name, every bribe, every crime." She took it, eyes wide. "This will bring down more than just Kane." Idris exhaled. Good. Because this wasn't just about Kane. This was about every corrupt system built on fear. And now the whole world would know. Malik stood in front of the courthouse watching as Richard Kane was led away in handcuffs. The media swarmed, cameras flashing, reporters shouting, "Mr. Kane, do you have anything to say about the allegations? Is it true you ran an illegal operation targeting black residents?" Kane's face was pale, his power stripped away. But Malik knew the truth. This was only happening because of Idris. Idris stood beside him, arms crossed, watching in silence. Malik turned. "This wouldn't have happened without you." Idris didn't answer. He just stared as Kane disappeared into the police van. Because he knew. Men like Kane never stayed locked up for long. Across the city, news stations played the footage of Kane's confession. The corruption within the Lakeside HOA has been exposed in a shocking scandal. Dozens of families have come forward, revealing years of threats and illegal evictions. Idris Elba, the Hollywood actor, is being credited for uncovering the operation. Malik's neighbors, once too afraid to speak up, were now reclaiming their community. The fake cops? Arrested. The corrupt officials backing Kane? Under investigation. For the first time in years, they could breathe. But Idris, he knew this wasn't over. That night, Idris walked alone through the quiet streets. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. A deep voice on the other end, calm but cold. You made enemies today. Idris didn't react. The voice continued. More powerful than you think. A brief silence. Then, a low chuckle. You're in over your head, Elba. Click. The call ended. Idris exhaled slowly. He stared out into the dark city skyline, muscles tense. More powerful than Kane. A bigger enemy. A bigger fight. Good. He pulled out a cigarette, lit it, took a slow drag, then smirked. Let them come. Cut to black.